So now you got to make your irrigation schedule. And before I jump into a lot of tables, any questions?
Let's just wait for the delay. So here's one. How do you account for? Yeah, sure. How do you account for the row middle cover crop water use?
You don't water that.
There you go. Perfect.
You're irrigating your crops. So yeah, I mean, the cover crop's going to use water. I would say in my experience, you know, the vineyards that I've been working in, typically there's no more cover crop by the time you got to water. And ultimately, if we'll get into like how when you decide to start and all that sort of thing. You know, the grapevine's going to be using a lot of water, and the roots are going to be wherever the roots are, a lot deeper typically than a cover crop.
And when you're dripping, you're dripping into the herbicide strip.
Yeah, it's going right. That's the whole thing with drip irrigation too, is that you're just providing water right in one spot for that plant that you're trying to grow. So the cover crop's gonna mine the soil in the center of the row. The vine uses some of that water, but it primarily relies on the water that it's using from the irrigation system below the drippers. So typically what you want to do is you want to set up a table like this when you make a schedule. And so we usually do it weekly. So you can start it out. I think this one I just said April 1st because, you know, whenever you want to do this, and it's good to have like a regular schedule. So if you do it on Monday mornings, do it on Monday mornings. If you do it on Tuesday or Wednesday, always do it on a Tuesday or Wednesday. This is the way I like to do it. I like to have a column either wherever in the table in the Excel sheet for some field notes, typically phenology, but you can put other stuff in there too, like a tractor took out a bunch of posts or something like that. I don't know. Crop water use would be like the next columns in the table. What I've done here is I used to have a column here that would show KC every single week, degree days, accumulated degree days every single week. And what I've done here is just collapse that, because ultimately what we're going to be using is this ETC value, this crop water use value. So sometimes like for example, our weather stations here for some crops like pear trees or whatever, they'll just give you a crop water use. It's sort of like, it's your own, use at your own risk if you want to use that. If you wanted to calculate your own ETC, you would then add the column of degree days every week. Every week that has degree days, it would be a KC. If you're doing your own KC, you can just put in your own KC and then put in ETO. So the columns here in the beginning are sort of like how are you getting your data and how do you want to set it up? But ultimately, we start with this crop water use ETC. Since we're dealing with drip systems, as I said, converting it to gallons always helps, because typically emitters have a output that however many gallons per hour, and you typically know how many emitters you have per vine. Usually it's 2 half-gallon emitters per vine, and so it's 1 gallon per hour. So converting it to gallons makes it very easy. So how do you account for in-season rainfall? What do you do when it rains? We haven't even talked about that. So in-season rainfall, of course, is anything that falls after bud break. Not all the stuff that hits the ground is absorbed into the soil and stored in the root zone and made available to the plant. So there's a little bit of a accounting kind of balancing that you need to do. For irrigation scheduling purposes, we often talk about effective rainfall, which refers to the amount that's taken up by the soil and made available to the root zone. And so this equation here shows you that. So basically what we're saying is there's an actual amount of rainfall, and the first quarter inch we're discounting, that the first quarter inch isn't made available to the plant. And then of that remainder, 80% is available to the plant.
So
this is just from the published literature. I wholly understand that rainfall falling on like a dry, cracked surface, that water is taken up into the soil differently than like a wet surface, whether the surface of the soil is covered with something growing or not. So this is sort of like another one of those areas where it's like there's some fudge factors here, and you need to make your best decision on whether or not you want to believe me or not.
We were just discussing on the live feed here. So here in the East Coast, right? There's these vineyards are characterized as having high vigor, right? So a lot of Cornell research is devoted to like dropping vigor out, and one of the ways people have done that, of course, is cover cropping. And especially putting cover crops directly underneath the vine and moving away from the herbicide strips. So when we do that, of course, we're going to be pulling up water, irrigation water, but do we need to account for that?
You would need to account for that. I don't know how much it is.
Yeah.
And it would depend on the cover crop. So now you've complicated the system in which you've got basically two crops growing in the same place, and so presumably you would need to put on more water. But my question would be, if the problem is too much vigor and you're putting more plants under the grapevine to grow to use that water to control or to use whatever to control the vigor,
right?
Why are we talking about irrigation scheduling?
Right.
You know, and so there's a kind of a disconnect in what kind of cultural practices you're going to put more time and effort into, like worrying about, I think. And you have to how do you partition that water use between some fescue growing underneath the vine and the vine itself? Well, if over vigorous vines are your problem, figuring out how to irrigate them may not be maybe that's not the thing that you want to be doing. Maybe you don't need to irrigate them at all, is what I'm saying.
So then he's saying, so it's because of it's because in some Augusts, then you have seasonal droughts.
Sure.
So it's an uncommon occurrence, but it happens.
So we'll go through other later about how to assess whether the plant is really dry and needs to be watered. This is just how you would do it if you were in a situation where you're regularly irrigating. So you put all that into the table. You have total rainfall. We subtract some, call it effective rainfall, and now you have a difference in inches of how many inches the vine used versus the inches in rainfall that it received. And some of these are negative, obviously, meaning like it rained more than the vine used for water. But eventually they kind of go away. This is data from Southern Oregon. And so, hang on, let me pause here. So you put in the total rainfall, calculate effective rainfall, calculate the difference between weekly crop water use and weekly effective rainfall. So that's where we're at. So now we have a difference. So this is kind of like the amount that, this is the amount that the vine used that you may or may not want to replace. So how do you account for soil moisture? So just a little bit of a refresher on soil moisture terms. We can think of the soil volume that the vine rooting system takes up as like this bucket. And field capacity is, you can't put any more water into that bucket without it either draining out due to gravitational forces or running off the surface. And so that would be like saturation, where like the soil is saturated with water. It's either running off the surface or draining out. Once it's all done running off and draining out, the total amount of water that's held is field capacity. The first 50% of that water is what's called readily available water. It's the easiest for the plant to get. The last 50%, as you approach permanent wilting point, becomes much more difficult for the plant to get. And completely dry would be like you dried it in an oven. This never actually happens in the field. There's always going to be some water in the field. The question is, can and how easy it is for the plant to get it. So you can then put in some columns that put in your available soil water. And so, for example, you start with an estimate of the total available soil water in your root zone at field capacity. So how do you figure that out? Well, you can get a soil moisture meter. We'll talk about that in a second. Or you can go here, the Web Soil Survey, people at the USDA, USGS, US or NCRS, I think, done a lot of work mapping soils. These used to be in like reams and reams of really old books, and now it's all online. Very, very convenient. There's so much data available here. It's unbelievable. I'm still finding data here that I never knew existed. And here's just like a map of a vineyard that we were working in recently to show you all these different contours and soil kind of map units and things. And you can maybe see the outlines of the vineyard blocks underneath. And so again, you got a vineyard block, there's different soil types. You have to make a decision as a practitioner. How are you going to make a good estimate of the water holding capacity, the available water of your vineyard block, and what is the rooting zone? So what's the effective rooting zone?
By the way, for my students, there are videos. So some of you have already worked with it, but if you haven't and you want to, there are videos on my YouTube channel that go over how to use the USGS, NRCS soil, web soil survey stuff in QGIS. So you can have use it like kind of more customizable to your operation. Okay, go ahead.
Russell, how am I doing on time?
Oh, you have all the time you need.
All right. I don't believe that, but okay. So then you subtract this difference from the total available soil water. This is like assuming that the soil profile was full at the beginning of the season. This is why it's called the checkbook method. You just continue doing this all the way down. Optional, I like to do this, converting the absolute value of available soil water into relative values to make just easier, because like I don't know what 4 inches or 5 inches or whatever means. I just want to know what percent is full. Oops, sorry. So you can see that running all the way down. You want to account for your irrigation system efficiency. This is often ignored. Irrigation method, each irrigation method has a different application efficiency. The good thing about drip irrigation is that usually it's around 90%. But the question is, how would you determine your application efficiency? Well, the easiest way of doing it is to literally measure how much water is coming out over a unit time. So you can do that with a water meter, where you turn on your system, you look at the water meter, you figure out where it started and where it ended over a piece of like 20 minutes or whatever, and you can figure out like, well, I thought I was going to put down in gallon per hour, and I actually put down like 2/3 of a gallon per hour. So my efficiency is pretty bad. Sometimes you may be putting out more than you thought. I was working with a grower who thought he was putting out 1 gallon per hour, and he was putting out 2 gallons per hour. So that was a surprise for him. Water meters, very important. Always want to check and audit yourself. So you put your efficiency in, assuming it doesn't change over time, which it usually won't unless something terrible happens. Then finally, you can calculate how many hours you need to run the system for, crop water use divided by inches per hour, and your efficiency factor. And then the rule of thumb is that you would initiate the first irrigation event when absolute or relative soil moisture values drop below a predetermined threshold value. Usually it's 50%. So when the soil is 50% dry from whatever it was when it was wet, that's when you would initiate an irrigation. So in this case, these are real data. We said, this is me. By the way, I'm managing irrigation in my office. I haven't left the farm office yet. I haven't done any sort of anything. So I was sitting in the office. I'm like, soil's getting drier. Maybe we should turn on the water. So this says you should just turn on the water on the week of July 3rd. We were lucky enough to be out there monitoring the vines as well with measuring water status.
We have a quick question. if you're applying a fixed amount of gallons for a fixed amount of time, how do you ensure that that amount fills the root zone? We were discussing this last night, actually.
Oh, you're talking, this is the volume and frequency.
Yeah.
I'll get to that at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, there's obviously a difference between like putting it all on at once versus spreading it out. We'll talk about that. So we were also monitoring those same vines for with the pressure bomb, measuring water status, and we said we would turn on the water when it got to this value here with the orange dashed line. And we actually turned on the water on July the 10th when it got pretty damn close. I mean, it was within the margin of error. And so that was a week after our checkbook method said that we should do it. So we did pretty good. So it was remarkable to see how well, in this case, that checkbook method lined up with the water status threshold that we were using, and that is like a published threshold for when you would want to start water.